Welcome to Asian Review. I'm your host, Bill Sharp. My guest today is J. Michael Cole, who's joining us via Skype from Taiwan. Michael has a very distinguished career in writing. He served as the deputy editor and a staff writer for the Taipei Times for a number of years. He currently is the editor-in-chief of a publication called Taiwan. His op-ed pieces have appeared in a number of very prestigious publications, the Wall Street Journal for one, Jane's Defense Weekly, and the list goes on. He also has been interviewed on a number of TV stations, including the BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera, etc. For a number of years, he served in the Canadian Security and Intelligence Services. After leaving that position, he went on to Taiwan, where he's been for 15 years, I believe it is. And he's a real expert on military affairs as well as political affairs, and we are very happy to have him with us today. Welcome to you from Hawaii. Hawaii reaching out to Taipei. Good to see you.
Hi, Bill. Thanks for having me on the show.
You bet. Well, before we sort of get into the meat of the matter here, tell me, how did you get interested in Taiwan?
Well, first of all, when I worked for Canadian Intelligence, I was among the wave of individuals who were hired after 9/11. So oftentimes there is the idea out there that I moved to Taiwan because of my previous employment, which could not have been further from the truth. I was largely focused on Middle East affairs, ISAF in Afghanistan, Al-Qaeda, and China really did not figure in my work during that period. That being said, once I decided that I needed a career change, for reasons I will not go into in this interview, this part of the world, which China has realized its growing military strength, its growing economic importance, made it very clear to me that someone was hoping to do journalism, to do analysis, would be very well advised to move to this part of the world. Now, that being said, I was also aware that moving to China would have its own list of problems, access to information, speech. But there was this very liberal plot of land right next to China that I knew was a lot freer, if you will, in terms of its media, of its way of life, and that also provided a very interesting angle to look at China. So Taiwan was obviously the best choice for me.
Interesting. I always find it intriguing how different folks get interested in Taiwan, because it's been a very long-standing interest of mine since the early 70s, actually. Well, before we go on, I'd like to reach out to the audience and encourage you to tweet in any question that you might have. Our guests would be glad to answer them, and we'd love to hear from you. Let's get on with it. Military, Taiwan military, strengths and weaknesses. How would you assess them?
Well, if we look at the problem that we oftentimes face is that people look at the Taiwanese military and compare it with the Chinese military on a boat-for-boat or plane-for-plane basis, which is an approach to military affairs that strongly encourages defeatism. And this is something that we have been seeing in Taiwan. This is something that we have been seeing among Taiwan military watchers over the years as well. There's no way, 10 years ago, the balance of power definitely shifted to Taiwan Strait, and very much so in the PLA's favor. So if you look at compare the ORBATs, definitely Taiwan is the weaker side in the equation. That being said, this has forced Taiwan to reset or revisit its definition of military victory, what it is that they seek to accomplish with the equipment that they have at play. And Taiwan, in that regard, has several strengths. It is an island. A military invasion of Taiwan would be extremely complex, probably even more difficult than the assault the beaches of Normandy. So these are all geographical elements Taiwan can play and can use to its advantage. So basically, Taiwan's strength is both geographic, and they need to exploit that advantage using the Taiwan Strait as an area of denial, for example. And this is something that does not get reported a lot on, in large part because the Taiwanese military itself does not want to telegraph how it would try to counter a Chinese attack on Taiwan.
Sure, so that's understandable.
So yes, it's. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, no, yeah, you're the guest, you go ahead.
Well, it certainly faces serious challenges. I mean, Taiwan has the lowest birth rate on the face of the planet, so it definitely makes it difficult for the armed forces to recruit young people. They are currently transitioning towards an all-volunteer force, but the military has yet to be turned into an appealing career choice for young Taiwanese, for example.
Let's pick that one up a little bit later. You know, back to, I'd like to just pick up on that point you mentioned about how difficult it is to launch a successful amphibious assault on Taiwan. And I remember talking to you in April when we talked in Taiwan, that I believe it was you were saying that, you know, the beaches of Taiwan, the type of sand there, is really not very conducive to a landing. That, if I remember right, it's the kind of sand that sinks, right? So if you're moving like armor off of some, you know, vessel, your armor is going to sink in the sand, if I recall correctly. Do I have that right?
Yeah, that is definitely the case. And there's only the beaches on the side of Taiwan that faces China that could be conducive to an amphibious assault. The other side in Taiwan's rear is mostly cliffs, so there is no way PLA forces could launch an amphibious assault from that side.
I often read in the literature that the Danshui area is probably the most conducive area for a PLA assault.
Yeah, Danshui, Hsinchu in northern central Taiwan as well. And I mean, this is where the Taiwanese military tends to park its armor, its tanks, and its missile launchers as well. So it tells us where they expect a Chinese amphibious assault would take place.
You know, it seems in recent years the mainland and their maneuvers, or I suppose we call them sea maneuvers, they put a lot of emphasis on the eastern coast of Taiwan. Why is that?
Well, again, this is a long-standing approach to an attack on Taiwan. A lot of this we need to realize as well is probably there is an element of political signaling in any military maneuver or exercise by the PLA as well. The timing is oftentimes quite revealing. It can be timed coincide with the announcement of U.S. arms sales to Taiwan. Whenever there are political developments in Taiwan that indicate that there might be some foot dragging, if you will, on political talks on unification. Currently, we're seeing signs that Taiwan might not be moving in the direction that Beijing was hoping after 7-8 years of rapprochement under Beijing. So no wonder that we have seen exercises, we have seen simulations recently of a PLA assault on the building that looked a lot like their presidential office in Taipei.
Right.
This coincided with a meeting in Washington, D.C. between Taiwanese military officials and their American counterparts. And as we shall discuss shortly on the show, there's the whole presidential and legislative elections in Taiwan that could very well bring to power a party that Beijing feels might lead to some difficulties in continuing the rapprochement that they've seen in the news.
You know, you touched on the subject, and we're going we're in sync here because I wanted to talk about arms sales, and especially by the U.S. Do you see any arms sales coming up? We really haven't heard of any new ones for a while.
Yeah, there's none that I'm aware of. This is currently, as Shirley Khan wrote recently in a report, this is the longest period since the late 1980s that we have not seen a notification to U.S. American Congress on arms sales to Taiwan. To my knowledge, there has been very little effort on Taiwan's side to secure arms releases by the United States. These up are obviously the ongoing talk for the submarines.
You know, that's a very interesting point because, if you want arms, you got to tell us, right? And as you suggested, other than a big Taiwan push for a submarine, I really haven't heard of any. I mean, I periodically hear about, they would like the F-35, but I don't think that's going to happen, maybe ever. Yeah. And speaking of submarines, where are we on that?
Well, Taiwan keeps asking for diesel-electric submarines, which the United States stopped making several decades ago. So they're kind of talking past each other as well, because the Taiwanese side keeps asking for something that the Americans cannot actually release. That being said, over the years, Taiwan has quickly realized that the most feasible option for them would be domestic development, which comes with its whole series of technical challenges as well.
Sure.
Which is why in recent years, Taiwanese engineers and Ministry of National Defense officials have traveled the world and have discussions with different people from countries that do have the technical knowledge to produce the hulls that would be needed for the submarines that they're looking into. And where the United States comes in addition to political support that would certainly facilitate the transfer of that kind of technology from a third country, Taiwan needs assistance in radar, fire control systems, and the weapons systems as well that would be installed on those submarines. So there is definitely an American angle even to a domestic submarine program for Taiwan.
Do you see any, as you said, the United States hasn't produced diesel submarines for some time. There's a number of other countries around the world that do, most prominently Germany, Japan, Sweden, Holland, France, Britain. Italy, I think, produces submarines as well. Do they have a chance with any of those other countries?
That's why I mentioned the political support from the United States.
Mm-hmm.
This would a transfer of such technology would largely be contingent on that third country getting some sort of a green light from Washington D.C.
A little U.S. pressure.
or U.S. pressure. Yeah, it's a euphemism for green light. The context is changing as well. As you're well aware of, in recent years, China has done certain things that were largely counterproductive in terms of it's trying to portray itself as peacefully rising. Its whole claims to the South China Sea, the dispute with Japan in the East China Sea, the fact that despite closer ties with Taipei, the PLA never stopped to obtain and develop the equipment that it would need for an assault on Taiwan. The international community is slowly realizing, and Washington itself is slowly realizing, that they have been giving to China for several years, hoping that it would become a responsible stakeholder. This is not exactly what we're seeing nowadays. So in the long term, it could very well translate into a willingness to push back a little, and Taiwan is certainly one of the means by which the international community can push back.
That's a very good point, and I'm really glad you made it. And given that, I think maybe this would be an ideal place to take a break. We'll be right back. You're watching Asia in Review. I'm your host, Bill Sharp. Our guest today is J. Michael Cole, joining us from Taipei, Taiwan, via Skype. Michael is a real expert on Taiwan military affairs as well as Taiwan politics, and he's a great writer. We'll be right back. Don't go away.
Hi, Jay.
Hi, Keith.
My name's Keith Bettinger.
I knew that.
And I'm the host of ThinkTech Asia.
I knew that too.
Here on ThinkTech.
Fabulous. You got a great show going, Keith.
Thank you very much. And for our viewers out there that are interested in ThinkTech Asia, it airs every Tuesday from 4 to 4:45, and it can be accessed online at thinktech.com.
Yeah, so what kind of guests you like?
Well, we have a number of guests from academia, from practitioners of international affairs. Sometimes we have military officials. Sometimes we have public officials on the show. And our goal, we try to talk about current issues in South Asia, Southeast Asia, East Asia, and Central Asia, all throughout the Asian realm in more depth than you would find in traditional mainstream
That's the
media.
difference, isn't it?
Exactly.
That you're reaching out beyond what ordinary news media would do.
Right.
And that's why we like you so much.
We're trying to provide a thinking person's perspective, an intelligent perspective on what's going on, and we're both sides of the story, or even when there's more than two sides, we try to cover every angle. And I think that that's one of the big benefits that we provide here at ThinkTech, is it's a really innovative source of educational programming for the people of Hawaii.
You're great, Keith. You are a great host. You got a great show going on. I watch it every week.
Thanks very much.
Why don't you
Jay.
guys watch it every week too, okay?
4:45 to 4 to 4:45 every Tuesday.
Welcome back to Asian Review. I'm your host. My guest today is J. Michael Cole, joining us via Skype from Taiwan. Our show today, Guns and Politics. Michael is a real expert on Taiwan military affairs as well as political affairs. We really encourage you to send in your questions via Twitter. We're just sitting here waiting for your tweets. And we're talking about submarines and Taiwan's desire to acquire submarines, which it badly needs. It has 4 submarines altogether. 2 probably belong in museums, and the other 2 are aging. Let's put it that way. I believe they're 1988 vintage, purchased from Holland. Well, as I was mentioning to you the break, I hear the comment, well, Taiwan doesn't really need submarines. They don't really know how to use them anyway, so why worry about it? And what's your take? What's your response?
Well, this is not something that I have heard very often coming from the United States. In general, the U.S. has been supportive, or at least has agreed that Taiwan does need the kind of deterrent Marines would provide for the Taiwanese Navy. That being said, there are certain elements on the U.S. side that are a bit apprehensive at seeing more submarines being active within the region. The Taiwan Strait itself is actually very problematic in terms of submarine traffic. In the region itself, there are too many submarines. A number of countries have acquired a number of submarines in recent years, so the traffic is increasing. Countries here might not necessarily be playing by the rules of the games when it comes to sending their submarines, not telling other countries where they're actually sending their submarines. So this inevitably increases the risk of clashes, of accidents. And this is not something that the U.S. Navy, for example, would want to see happen in a region that's becoming increasingly tense because of overlapping planes.
That's a very interesting perspective. Now, you know, lots of European countries that produce submarines or have the good submarines, like Portugal has the good German submarines, and Greece has the good submarines, and these guys are a little bit strapped for cash. Do you see any hope that they might sell some of their submarines to Taiwan just to get a little extra money? Any chance of that?
I don't know if the sale of submarine hulls would have much of an impact on the economy of Greece, for example. That is a start. I mean, that could be used as a springboard for future arms transfers and all that. But in terms of the economic impact, I don't think it would be substantial enough to, in and of itself, serve as a counter to the political consequences that might accrue with Beijing from such a sale to Taiwan.
I see your point. It would be lunch money at best.
I believe so.
You know, it seems to me there's a couple aspects to weapon sales. One is, I guess, the obvious one. Of course, military people like modern, cutting-edge weapons, right? I think everybody knows that. I certainly could see that when I was in the military. But, and from purely defense of and offensive reasons, having modern, up-to-date weapons makes a lot of sense. But there also seems to be a morale factor. I sometimes think there's a bit of a morale crisis going on in the Taiwan military. Part of it attributed to the fact that a lot of the equipment they have is not so modern. I see when they get the Apaches, they go crazy. They want to show them off. They're very proud to have those Apaches. Probably they wanted, they probably wanted F-16 Cs and Ds, but, the Apaches this is a pretty good compromise. And I sometimes wonder if, selling certain weapons to Taiwan is a way of boosting up the morale of the military is a consideration, especially if the U.S. hopes to have Taiwan play a greater role in the rebalance, and it seems that Taiwan very much wants to do that. And it would seem to me that it would make sense if Taiwan played a greater role in the rebalance. I mean, I think without Taiwan in the rebalance, it kind of leaves a hole there between Japan and the Philippines. Well, what's your take?
Well, absolutely. I mean, there's no doubt that Taiwan should play a role in the rebalance, and there is no doubt that Taiwan is playing a role in the rebalance. For very evident reasons, the American side probably cannot advertise the role that Taiwan is playing in the same way that it advertises the role that the countries like Japan or the Philippines are playing. There is always the risk of overly alienating Beijing or increasing Beijing's fears that it's being contained if you overemphasize the kind of role that Taiwan is playing in that exercise.
Now, when you say Taiwan's playing a role in the rebalance, this is the way I would see it, a humanitarian role. Okay, would you agree with that?
This is certainly a component of the rebalance.
A very low-profile role in the PSI, okay, searching certain ships that could conceivably be transporting nuclear paraphernalia to or from Korea. In what other ways?
Well, a few years ago, Taiwan finally turned on their long-range early warning radar on Lethem.
Okay.
Which is a $1.3 billion radar system that was built by Lethem. It looks approximately 3,000 kilometers inside China at any air-breathing targets. It may or may not have satellite tracking capability. This is obviously something that the American government would be more than interested in tapping into. This is a capability that cannot possibly not play a role in the U.S. rebalance to Asia.
The Lethem radar facility is probably one of the most modern, most cutting-edge radar facilities in the world. Some people say it's better than what the U.S. itself has.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, will the U.S. government come out and say we're using the intelligence gathered as part of our rebalancing to Asia? Obviously not. Is that intelligence being passed on to you as a government by the Taiwanese government? The Taiwanese government will say that it is not. But as you well know, when we're talking about highly classified military intelligence, countries will never confirm or deny that they are actually sharing that intelligence with allied countries. But I would be mightily surprised if the Taiwanese government were not sharing some of that information with the U.S. and perhaps even Japan.
I'm sure that the Taiwan government has plenty of intelligence assets on the mainland. Just how good they are, that might be a question. It seems when it comes to human intelligence, Taiwan definitely has the advantage. When it comes to electronic intelligence, the U.S. has the advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that statement.
Wow, interesting discussion. 70th anniversary of the end of World War II. Looking back on it, what's your view of the role that the Republic of China played in the defeat of Japan? For example, I'll give my question a little context here. When I first started studying about China in university in 1971, the narrative at that time was the Kuomintang, the nationalists under Chiang Kai-shek, really didn't do much. They hung around in the rear, knowing that there's a civil war coming, and they were saving their best troops for that, their crack troops. As the war went on, those crack troops sort of lost their training edge, and ultimately, when it came to the Civil War, they didn't do so well. And it was really the Kuomintang, the 8th Route Army, the new 4th Army, did I say the Kuomintang? I meant the CCP.
Yeah.
That was responsible for the victory. Now the narrative seems to be changing. You know, say, well, you know, Chiang Kai-shek, he understood the Japanese pretty well. He had been in the Japanese military. He knew that the Japanese were a lot more formidable than his troops. And he was sort of buying time, sort of a classical Chinese tactic of sucking the enemy in deep and then chopping their head off, right? And this would also give him time to build up somewhat of a war industry. And he had so many troops and U.S. support that it's really because of that, although he might not have been the most stellar general, that he won. What's your take?
Well, there's been tremendous soul searching and questioning in recent weeks because of the celebrations, not only in Beijing, but we had much smaller celebrations here in Taipei as well. Right. That emphasized a very different version of history.
Right.
There is no doubt that the Americans won the war against Japan. It was not China that won the war against Japan. However you define China. That being said, by drawing...
That's a good thing to say, however you define China. Very aptly put.
Yeah, well, I sit in Taipei, right? That being said, there is no doubt that by drawing in millions of Japanese soldiers over a period of several years all over China, that the nationalist forces, and in some instances the communist forces, made it very, very difficult for Japan to tap into those resources and send them back to the main islands or send them to other destinations in the Pacific to combat American and allied forces. These are forces that would have certainly made the life of U.S. Marines a lot more difficult had they been in the Philippines, had they been in small islands all over the Pacific. So in that regard, China did not win the war against Japan, but there's no doubt whatsoever in my mind that China played a large role in at least weakening Japanese imperial forces during that period.
The ROC China.
The ROC China.
Okay, keep our China separate here. We'll be accused of being splittist, I guess, but we'll take that chance. I think I'm sort of coming around to the more contemporary interpretation. And it certainly wasn't the explanation in the early 70s when, you know, Kissinger was going to China, and it was really a boom time for anything to China. There was a lot of euphoria around, and euphoria is not always objective, as you know. What do you make of Lin Zhan's trip to the mainland with a group of retired ROC flag officers and a couple of other politicos, like the head of the New Party?
Mm-hmm. Well, this certainly is not treason. This certainly was not illegal because Lin Zhan went as a civilian. He no longer serves a role in government, and at most he is a honorary chairman of the Kuomintang. So there is no, I mean, there are certain elements in Taiwan who say that his pension should touch, that he committed treason against the ROC or against Taiwan, no matter how you call it. It was certainly ill-advised. It was certainly improper in terms of the signaling that it sent. Again, even though he no longer serves in government and has only an honorary symbolic position within the KMT, right, he is still perceived as someone who has some amount of influence within the KMT. It may now have dropped significantly because the KMT itself did not walk over to China.
That's a very fair answer, On that note, again, let us take our second break of the day here, and we'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Chris Lethem, and I'd like to invite you to come and watch my show every Wednesday at 3. I'm interested in a variety of issues that have to do with politics and our local business economy. And I'd like to bring on guests who like to talk about everything from technology to social media to what we can be doing to improve our environment. And so I'd like to invite you every Wednesday at 3 to stay and watch my show here with ThinkTech Hawaii. And I'll see you there.
Aloha, my name is PJ and I'm the host of Hawaii Sports Update. I am very interested in local sports and that's why I host the Hawaii Sports Update show. I bring in guests from Hawaii, I bring in guests from UH, I bring in guests from the community, I bring in big names, I bring in small names, I bring in all names that are community related and doing positive things, sports related in the community. Come join me every Tuesday at 1 p.m. here on Hawaii Sports Update. You can also join me on my golf tournament, the first annual PJ Sports Radio Show golf tournament. It's going to be held at Coral Creek. For any information, go to ThinkTech Hawaii, INC, and friend us. The PayPal and a summary of the event will be right there available for you. And don't forget to tweet us.
Welcome back to Asian Review. I'm your host, Bill Sharp. My guest is J. Michael Cole, joining us via Skype from Taipei, Taiwan. We're having a really interesting discussion. We're really tapping into Michael's expertise on military affairs, of which he obviously is quite conversant. We were just talking about Lian Zhan's trip to Beijing to join in the 70th anniversary celebration there. As we were chatting during the break, I think we probably agree he's really getting near the end of his political career. He's 79, if I recall correctly. His futile attempt to get his son elected as mayor of Taipei was disastrous. He certainly is not getting much praise for this trip to the mainland. I have to say, I sometimes wonder what his real motives are. That being said, you work for the Canadian Security and Intelligence Service, so let me ask you this question. What do you make of all these ROC flag officers that have been co-opted by the mainland, by the National Security Bureau, of China? What do you make of that? What causes all this? What's the cause? Is it lack of morale? I find it distressing. And when Taiwan talks about a greater role in the rebellions, it's like, yeah, well, if you clean up some of this espionage stuff, maybe your case will be strengthened,
Yeah. Well, Taiwan faces an immense intelligence espionage challenge from China, something that also, like the military threat against Taiwan, did not diminish with the supposedly warmer tides in the Taiwan Strait in the past 7 or 8 years. In many ways, by opening up to China via different agreements on tourism, on agreements on investment, educational exchanges, academic conferences, it has made it even more easy for the Chinese intelligence apparatus to make contacts all over Taiwan, to establish itself and its networks all over Taiwan. At the same time, this was not accompanied by an increase in the counterintelligence apparatus on the Taiwanese side, both within the armed forces and in the civilian sector with the National Security Bureau. So they're facing a much greater challenge with the same equipment or resources that they used to enjoy, and in some ways they've even cut back on those resources. So of course we're going to see more intelligence operations targeting Taiwan. The interesting thing, though, is that several of those cases were not major cases, but there is once again a very interesting political component in that even a successful counterintelligence operation by the Taiwanese side will be self-defeating, because then it's picked over by the media and people say, oh, here's another case where Taiwanese military personnel were spying on behalf of China.
That's a good point, yeah. You know what, you're right there on the ground, right? You're right there on the front lines, sitting here in the mid-Pacific. Sometimes I read about, General so-and-so got arrested for passing information to the mainland, or Colonel so-and-so. And then suspended sentence, 1 year. It all seems light to me, feather light. But well, what's your take on that? Now, admittedly, General, I can't think of his name now, General Liu, right?
Right.
He's serving 30 years. He got a substantial sentence. I don't know whether he'll get some sort of amnesty in the future or whatever, but at least initially his sentence was 30 years. That's pretty chunky. I don't think I can fault him for that. But some of these other sentences seem to be just so light. I know in the legislature, a member of the DPP introduced a bill. They said, well, military officers, especially of a certain rank, that are co-opted by the mainland, their pensions should be stopped, terminated, abolished. I'm not sure what the status of that bill is today, given that the Nationals still have the upper edge in the legislature, I'm kind of wondering if that's going to go all the way through or not. You probably know more about that than I do.
Yeah, well, that piece of legislature has not gone beyond it being tabled in the legislature. Just put it that. Yeah, Luo Tenta was sentenced for 30 years. I mean, his case was very likely the worst espionage case in the past half century. So the courts did crack down pretty heavily. The other sentencing that we have seen in the past few years, to me, screams of politicization. The Ma administration having largely focused on improving cross-strait relations, again, did not want to signal too much enmity by imposing large sentences.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand what you said at first, but now I understand what you're saying, and I think I agree with you, and I've often wondered that. Are they handing down such light sentences because they just don't want to upset Beijing? And if I understand you right, that's what you're saying.
That is my assessment. By imposing heavy sentences on every single Taiwanese military officer who has been caught spying for China, would elevate the level of animosity towards China at a time when the Taiwanese government and political forces were trying to send a very different signal. Which is also why in recent years they oftentimes downplayed the PLA military threat against Taiwan, or would not acknowledge that espionage had not stopped against Taiwan, but had in fact increased.
Where does the real pressure come from to downplay? Does it come from the business community, the Taishan, given the Taiwan businessmen on the mainland, which represent the interest of big Taiwan companies? They're afraid that this is going to get in the way of their bottom line. Where does the real pressure come for that? And let me tag something else onto that, and then I'll let you add it. Earlier in the interview, you were saying that, well, there have been no real big arms requests that have come from Taiwan lately. Is that also to keep the mainland happy? In fact, I heard Mom make so many speeches about how he wanted F-16 season Ds, but I had a lot of trouble believing some of those, and I was wondering if he was just saying that for just to appease some folks in his own party. I don't really see him as having his heart into it. I don't think he's a military man, for first thing. So I give you a big question there. I'm going to sit back and listen now,
A two-part
as
question.
will our audience.
Well, there's no doubt that the business community and the Taishan will seek to maximize their interests and ensure that their business operations can continue. Now, that being said, the Taishan, the great majority of them are also proud Taiwanese. In
That's
their
a good
view,
point. That's a good point.
They're making money in China because this is where the action is, but they are contributing to Taiwan's economy by sending money back to Taiwan as well, right?
No, that's good. That's a good point.
So
That's
we
fair.
should not look at them as the enemy, as some people tend to do. Same with large business. So yes, to answer your first question, there is some pressure from the business community on Maingzhou to try to downplay the ongoing tensions in the Taiwan Strait. But from my understanding, the single most important type of pressure on the armed forces that sought to minimize the threat was political. It was from the Maingzhou presidential office itself.
That's my gut level feeling as well.
Because his principal object that he believes his legacy would be is to significantly improve relations with China. And it seems that this probably came at the expense of pretty much everything else, including Taiwan's national security. It was solely on a political level. Now, moving on, if I may, to
Sure, please.
part of your question, Joe repeatedly saying that he was seeking F-16 CDs from the United States. He would say that, but based on my own research, his representatives in Washington, D.C. were instructed not to actively follow through on that kind of language.
I believe that because I just never thought he was really sincere, really pushing for that. And he made endless speeches, but there was just a certain lack of sincerity to them.
Yeah.
We're down to our last 2 minutes here. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to get into any political discussion, so we're going to have to invite you back here pretty soon. But let's talk about your book here in the last 2 minutes. And that's, the name of the book is Black Island, 2 Years of Activism in Taiwan. Like I said, unfortunately, we only have 2 minutes, but give us an idea what it's about.
Okay, well, this is quite a departure from a journalist that has, in the past 10 years, looked mostly at military affairs in the Taiwan Strait. A few years ago, starting in 2012, it became obvious to me that the next big story in Taiwan would be civil society. There were issues with accountability, with transparency, that were all being exacerbated by closer contact with authoritarian China. So at a point, society itself, with the DPP only having a minority in the legislature, and in many ways busy not doing its job at the time, society itself said, okay, there's a risk that the government is crossing certain lines that would directly affect our quality of life, or democracy, or freedoms. We need to take action. So I started monitoring those protests, looking into the leadership, looking into the kind of language they were using, and wrote a series of articles about the Sunflower Movement last year that occupied the legislature over a trade deal with China, for example. And with that came an understanding, or a more refined understanding of, in my view, what it means to be a Taiwanese. The kind of nationalism that is bringing people together, even people who in their entire lives have voted for the PNT and are amenable to closer relations with China. But all these people as well have lines that I do not want closer ties with China to be detrimental to the democracy that is part of who I am. And that makes me proud as a Taiwanese.
That's great. Now, if someone wants to get your book, Amazon.com is the way, right?
Yeah, Amazon has it. There will be a Chinese language version published later this year as well.
Great. Well, we're just about out of time here. I really want to thank you for joining us today. You gave us a lot of really good information. And like I said, we're going to have to get you back, or maybe as you and your colleague, Chris Wong, and talk about politics and put the military stuff aside for that session. Thank you very much. It was great to see you. And thank you very much for watching Asian Review. We'll see you next week, same time, same place, and have a good day.